Welcome to On Target. My next guest, Jim MacDonald, has had several years in customer-facing roles for B2B tech companies for over 25 years. His experience spans everywhere from startups to large enterprises, including serving as a consultant and board member for various Boston-based startups. As a mentor through MIT's venture mentoring program and current CRO for the estate planning company Gentrio, Jim's favorite motto is, remember, it's not about you, it's about the customer. I can't wait to hear more about how he has built and sustained customer-centric teams over his tenured career. Now let's get into it. Jim, welcome to On Target.
Thank you. Look forward to chatting.
Absolutely. Now, Jim, over your career, I'm sure you've had many elevator pitches for different products, services, and solutions. But if you had to give an elevator pitch for yourself in 30 seconds or less, tell us how you'd introduce yourself.
That'd be a good one. Well, basically, I think I've been around long enough to have made all the mistakes that people would make in trying to sell and learning from them. That's been the basis of my background and where I've learned. Over 25 years, you go through a lot, and I've really become, I think, very astute and very insightful around technology trends and how we bring value through technology to large enterprises to help improve their businesses. And I've done that for over the last 5 or 6 or 7 big disruptive technology changes that have taken place over the years and have been very successful at it.
Well, on that basis, Jim, tell us a bit more about your story, right? 25 years is a long time. Walk us through some of the key highlights throughout that time.
Sure. Yeah, I started my sales career. I've been in the professional since I graduated back in 1983 of my undergrad, and I have gone through all of the other types of departments within a typical tech company. My entire career has been in the tech industry, so I know it well, and I've enjoyed the travel and the changes that have taken place along the way. And I started as a software engineer, so I've got a general knack and enthusiasm. I think you really have to love what you do in your business and in your career. And I've always had an enthusiasm and interest in technology. And, as we all know, we all lived through, there's been so many great advances and disruptions that have taken place over the course of the last 25 years. And I've had the ability to work with customers from small companies like my first foray into sales was a little company called Electronic Book Technologies, which you may not have heard of them, but they actually built one of the world's first commercial browsers. This is just when the Mosaic and Netscape browsers were coming out, and they came out with a browser that would allow large organizations to take all their paper-based publication budgets and eliminate them by putting all of their documents on a CD-ROM that's readable in an electronic book format with a browser front end. So very interesting technology. Again, big disruption, and we had a great time. And the big things I learned there about selling was it's really great when you can have a very succinct value proposition that you can describe and communicate with your customers. And, in that case we did. It was a very simple story, and we're extremely successful with it. I've also worked, that was out in California when I was working with them in the San Francisco Bay Area. And from there, I had an opportunity to work for a very large organization, Oracle Corporation, as a global account manager. And this is right around 2000 when the Y2K challenges were taking place. And a lot of Oracle's largest organizations, Cisco and Seagate, which were the two I managed, had big global challenges to upgrade and modernize their systems ahead of Y2K. So again, another big compelling event and urgency that created the opportunities, for people like me to be able to go in and get them to sign on to do these large investments and projects. Y2K, like everyone else, hit me pretty hard. I had left Oracle and done a few startups that had gone out of business, learning, that you can have the best story in town, but if the customer is not in a position to open up their kimono or open up their pocketbooks to actively pursue and solve problems, they're going to be challenged by that. It's going to be challenging to be able to sell. Through these years and through all of the work that I've done and all the experiences I've had, with some large companies like Oracle and Amazon, small companies like this company EBT, I've been able to really get a good grasp and a sense. People often say you need a good sales gut, and not that I necessarily believe in that being something that someone is born with. I think it's something you learn through experience. But you get to a point where you can sense, in any given conversation, where somebody is and where their head's at and where they might be interested in working with you or investing in you or spending money on the service you offer. And that's really a key to being a really good seller, particularly in high tech.
Really fascinating. There's a lot to unpack in that. One of the things that stood out to me is when you mentioned the importance of looking out for customers that are really willing to put their hands in their pocketbook, so to speak, and that premise of customer centricity also on that. So just walk us through how you've gone about actually choosing the right type of companies that have a product, service, and solution that the market actually has appetite for.
Yeah, well, I guess my initial response would be I didn't always make good choices. I think you make choices with the best information you have, and selling is really interesting because you never have 100% of the information. You really can't make always make the best decision. You've got to make decision oftentimes with severe lack of information, but you've got to, timing it requires you to make a decision sometimes before you want to. And I've gone to companies where it has been challenging, and I feel the thing that's gratifying about my career at this point is oftentimes I'm coming into companies and being asked to come into companies to help them get to the point where they have the compelling solution and the story and the positioning that makes a company really, interested in them. And they're going and approaching those companies in an interesting way. A good example is a company I'm with now, Gentrio, very small startup. I'm acting CRO for them. And, when I first got here, they were looking at various ways to try to sell an estate planning solution. And the reality is estate planning is not something people love to do. It's hard conversations they have to have with family and loved ones. And for us as a small company to try to sell a product direct to consumers was going to be really challenging. And so when we looked at all the different ways in which we could sell this, primarily through channel partners and referral partners, we realized we couldn't sell this as its own thing. We have to make it part of and a compelling part of. And just this morning we had a great call with a financial institution who was trying to figure out how to make the advisor more central to their clients' lives. And they're looking at trying to build a portfolio of tools that the advisor can use to help people, not just with financial planning, but with life planning. And so we found a way to make estate planning very relevant to that conversation and to that company, not for the value of estate planning in and of itself, but the ability for that to be a tool to add to a toolkit that advisor can then use to have a more enhanced and sticky conversation and relationship, with those people who primarily came to them maybe to manage an IRA or, a small investment account. They're now in a position to be able to grow that to a strategic relationship. So, it's not just the company and the product and the customer and their interest. It's crafting the message and then finding the right places where you have channels that are incented and see value in adding that to their portfolio and driving that out to the customer, is a much bigger value proposition.
Makes complete sense. Now, being able to take a message out to the market starts with hiring great talent. And you've had experience both in the startup ecosystem as well as with large enterprises. You mentioned the likes of Oracle. So, Jim, just walk us through some of your core principles around hiring criteria and any differences or nuances that you've seen in hiring great talent in a startup versus hiring great talent in an established organization.
Yeah, there's, as you'd said to me earlier, there's a lot to unpack there. Certainly. And one of the things I think I've found is it's not always easy to transition. I've been fortunate because of the roles I've had and the people I know and relationships I've had to be able to do some of this transition between big companies and smaller companies. But bigger companies often act differently, and the kinds of sellers you want to hire in that environment oftentimes are different than those you're going to want to bring into, let's say, a startup organization. And, there's lots of pieces to that. But primarily, you want to find people, and I think at smaller companies, you're going to want to find people who are much more willing to work independently, fail a lot more quickly, have a super positive, go get 'em attitude, and know they have to do a lot of things themselves, a lot of heavy lifting themselves. They might not have completed collateral. They might not have a really strong marketing engine that's bringing inbound leads. They might have to do more cold calling. They've got to kind of put their boots on and trudge through a lot of unfinished pieces in the sales process and a selling model that a lot of people who are used to maybe being a strategic account executive or working on larger, more strategic deals, it's a hard transition when you typically have a team. When I was at Oracle as a global account manager, I had 14 people on my Oracle, on my my Seagate account, to manage that global relationship. And I had a lot of administrative support. So it was a very different kind of environment than this, hey, you're on your own, good luck, here's a Salesforce login and some base collateral, and, we'll see if we can get some engineers to to jump in and help you with technical discussions and demos. You've got to really be very entrepreneurial in that scenario versus the other. So that's a general, description of some of the differences. But in salespeople in general, when I worked at Amazon, we hired over 100 people. I was directly involved in the hiring over 100 people as we grew that organization. And while Amazon's a massive company, we worked in a very small startup that we grew inside of Amazon. So we had the benefit of a brand, which gets you lots of meetings. When I worked at Oracle and Amazon, it's easy to pick up a phone and get a meeting with a CFO or a CIO or a CTO. But when you work for startups, you don't have that luxury. But at Amazon, they had a very, very structured way of going through a hiring process. And they had 14 leadership principles that I still use since I've left there. I still have brought those with me and use them very closely. And there's 3 in particular that I always look at, regardless of the kind of seller that I'm looking for. I want to find someone who's customer obsessed. And we've talked about this already a couple of times. I truly believe, and when I didn't believe it, I got burned. But if you're not starting with the customer's needs and working backwards to what you're going to provide to them, it's fraught with difficulty and often failure by not doing that. But you need to find someone who's customer obsessed, to want to love the customer's problem and really develop the rapport and relationship with that customer to want to go solve it with them. That's number one always. The second one is a bias for action. So low patience. I want to collect some information. I may not have 100% of the information, but when I feel is enough, I need to go with that gut, and I need to be able to take action. I can't wait until I have all the facts. I've got to be able to move quickly. And that's primarily due to the fact that, the environment we live in high tech moves so fast, you can't afford to wait. So those are the first 2. And the other one, which is really their track record, and it's called deliver results. Is the work I'm doing may not always be a revenue and a quota number you're hitting, but am I delivering results and showing a path to helping a startup company develop the right sales processes, giving feedback to help make sure the product, the holes in the products are being filled from the customer's perspective, and I'm doing the activities necessary to deliver results that are going to help bring that company forward.
It's a fascinating, broader conversation here, Jim, and I can relate to a lot of what you've said. I spent some time with AWS and certainly got to experience what it's like to be a small cog in a monstrous wheel, and I've spent a large part of the rest of my career in either startups or scale-ups, as I currently am in. And it's a completely different ball game. I remember being at AWS and, doing outreach to customers. And I mean, you pick up that phone and you got a smile at the other end, or at least there's familiarity with who you are and what you do, and a warm welcome to at least entertain an initial conversation typically. And then, I've been on the other side of the spectrum, right? And it's just it's a complete hustle. It requires a different mentality to, get the phone slam down on you time after time after time, and still find a way to pick yourself up and run at things at full pace. So it's a fascinating broader debate, and something that I'd encourage a lot of salespeople to try and get some experience on both ends of the spectrum, because it's very unique and it really lets you know who you are and where you're better served. One of the questions I did have through that, Jim, was those characteristics that you spoke about from your time with Amazon, those three. How much of that do you feel can be developed in someone versus them being innate characteristics in someone that you expect them to come to the table to you with?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, because I think sales, I don't know how many, people are born sellers. And you hear that comment sometimes. I think people are born with the attributes that could make them into good sellers. Things like enthusiasm, self-confidence, but not cockiness. The willingness to get knocked down over and over and over again. And, you stand up, you brush yourself off, you look and say, what can I take from this to learn, to maybe avoid that next time, and the commitment to get better. Those general kinds of attributes, I think, are really, great ones for selling. But as far as the ones I actually stated, deliver results is basically, your end results, which are your track record, which is, is always going to start at best choppy. You may, get lucky and be in the right place at the right time and get the right territory and be successful. But, over time, over 5, 10, 12 years of selling, that's going to even out, and your results over that period of time should build, and you'll learn from that and get better at it. So that's kind of a learned skill. I think the customer obsession, again, that's that passion and excitement to want to understand, naturally curious about what the customer is trying to do. More so almost than your own solution, right? A lot of times we get so caught up trying to pitch our features and our benefits, we're not listening enough to really love and understand the customer's problem, and then speaking to those problems and the solutions to those problems and how your products are going to solve them, right? And so having a natural curiosity to want to understand the needs of others is a sort of a foundation underneath that. The one in the middle, though, which is, sorry, it's I lost my train of thought here. So customer obsession,
bias for action.
Bias, yeah. And bias for action is the other one I mentioned, and I think that is something you probably are going to be bored. You don't want to be patient. You don't want to be, a good engineer is not often a good salesperson, because they're going to want to do all the detailed investigation and get it so it's 100% perfect. It's never going to break. It's always going to work. I need to make sure. That's why I love, one of my favorite things I do now is I'm doing some work in the area of work with startups. You mentioned MIT and the venture mentoring service. It's a whole lot of fun, because you have all these technical people who are trying to sell, and they're waiting for the perfect situation, right? And you can't do that. You have to have bias for action. You have to say, is this close? Yeah. It's not what I envision the product to be for the next, 3 years. But, if this gets me 6 months further and I can solve this person's near-term problem, but it's not going to be quite the development path I was going to take, that's okay. To be able to be action-oriented, said, I need to get to the next step with this customer, or I need to, disengage, right? Because if you're not going to be able to accommodate and bend to their needs to some degree, you might as well go look somewhere else.
So, Jim, we've unpacked some of the key characteristics that are important to you when it comes to hiring salespeople. With your time and tenure, I'd equally love to unpack how you think about developing leaders and hiring leaders, and whether a lot of that criteria is shared at the leadership tier, or actually whether you feel that there's more unique characteristics that you'd look for when it comes to hiring and developing leaders.
Yeah, I think it's probably best to begin with the ongoing and probably never-ending debate between, can a good salesperson be a good sales leader? I think the answer ultimately is it depends, and it depends on the person. I think the best sales leaders were okay or decent salespeople. They weren't incredibly over the top, off the charts sales individual sales contributors, but they were the ones who did fairly well, made their number, and seemed to be really good at sort of understanding how to be efficient, how to bring efficiencies to their processes and how to bring higher win rates, and what are the mechanisms and processes and things that we can that I can do that could translate well to kind of a management role, right? And because when you step yourself up into management, and I've had an opportunity, I had a team of about 35 people that I had at one point with one of my startups during my career, and frankly, I was not happy there because as you go, up the chain and you look to become more leadership oriented, you become more strategic, and you step back. You necessarily have to step back to some degree from the customers. You can't be on every one of these sales calls. If you've got 20 salespeople who are selling for you, you've got to be able to come back and be less engaged in the day-to-day activities. And I've always loved being with, and really participating in and loving that customer problem, as I said earlier. And, so the people that do well in the sales role, but also do really well in how they set up efficiencies, and they're always, trying to help make, your CRM system, and they're always the ones who, when you ask them, necessarily if you get a small team, you got a new candidate coming on board, and you want to interview them, you pick some people. They're the ones that really probe well and really, connect well, and they're the ones where the candidate said, "Hey, I really enjoyed speaking and working with this person," or there's signs you can see of someone who's got some attributes and maybe people skills to take on leadership role, having direct reports, and then working on, how do I build a process that's scalable so we can bring on more people and build that team up.
Absolutely. Makes a ton of sense. And when you then also create that separation factor between enterprise leaders or leaders within a startup, what are some of the different attributes that you feel are a bit more applicable to someone who needs to build a team, build a function from scratch versus someone walking into an established organization?
Well, I think if I'm someone, I mean, looking back on my career, I was given the opportunity to move into management roles in some not really very super large companies, $50, $75 million in revenue. Had a national team of maybe 20 people, and needed a leader, and they had enough process around where when I came in, I had some of these attributes I think that my manager recognized in me, and they offered me the role to move into a regional director role. So it was more of I think the medium to larger companies are going to probably give you a better opportunity, for someone looking at their sales career, wanting to go into management, to give you a path that you have the best chance of being successful at. I really think it's you got to be a special person, and you got to have a lot of things happen right in a startup organization where it's very bootstrapped, and maybe you're the first or second salesperson. And this is always a hard challenge. I see this in many startups I work with, where they bring in a salesperson who's a great individual contributor, but came in on the promise that if I do well, you're going to put me in management, or you're going to make me the CRO, right, or head of sales, and a lot of there's a high failure rate for that because you don't have a lot of support structure around you. You don't have other peers that are in the organization that can help you and coach you in assisting you in the management and leadership skills you need to develop in order to be successful in the role. You're kind of on your own in startups, where the founder gives you that position, but you don't have anybody as a mentor to help you grow the sales organization in a way that's going to be sustainable or scalable.
Yeah, it is an interesting one, and I've spoken multiple times about just the lack of sales leadership training and enablement that's out there. We see plentiful for sellers and field teams, but I still feel there's a drought really at the leadership tier. I feel that there's many examples I see from my peers that just are kind of having to figure it out once they get there, and that's all too common. So I definitely second what you're talking about in terms of having mentorship and certain structures around you to set yourself up for success. I want to fast forward now, Jim, into talking a bit more about some things around operational excellence in a way, really how you structure your week and set yourself up for success. Just walk us through what a typical week in the life of Jim looks like.
I mean, one of the great things about being in any sales role is it's always dynamic. And, the big joke is always, well, Sunday night, I spent my time, I laid out the priorities for the week, my schedule's, set, and I've confirmed my meetings, and I'm all set to go. And then Monday comes, and it all goes out the window. Now, it doesn't all go out the window, but, a lot of it does because, stuff happens. People call, the customer you thought was dead has popped back in and wants to make a fast decision, or, a deal you thought was going to close is now at risk. And, and you've got people that you're hiring, you've got all kinds of things that go on, and the priorities shift. And it's a bit chaotic, but it's also a bit exciting, and it's part of the reason why I think, those of us who have made sales their career get excited about, because, one of my other mantras besides, always listen to the customer is, if you don't like the way things are right now, don't worry, they'll change. And if you do like them, enjoy it because it's going to change, right? So you always want to make sure you're ready for some chaos during the week. But I'm a big believer in, there's two things in sales that matter: activities and closing skills. So you want to make sure and set up your time and make sure you prioritize the little time you have, the relatively little time you have to do the activities that are going to move the ball forward, whether you're an individual contributor or a man or a leader, right? What are the things I need to put in place and set aside that I want to do as activities that are going to bring, going to move things forward in my organization or in my career and my role in this company. And then the other piece is closing skills. I've got to make sure that, I've got the ability to go out and look, assess where I am, and at different times during a quarter or a month or a year, it's going to be different. I tend to think of more in terms of months and quarters. Enterprise sales, that's very typically the case. You come into a month, how did I do last month? What's my pipeline look like coming into the month? Where do I need to spend my time to make sure at the end of this month I'm in a better position in the areas that I need to be, and I'm sustaining in the areas that that I'm doing well in, and then make sure all that's leading towards obviously the goals I want to accomplish longer term. Primarily, how am I making towards my number? How am I making towards building an organization? How am I doing making sure we're meeting the strategic objectives of the company beyond revenue? So it's pretty dynamic. So it's hard for me to say, what's a week look like. Monday's typically an admin week. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, typically customer facing or people facing, to make sure I'm working with folks, whether it's traveling to organizations or locations or customer sites. I want to see us do more of that. And I'm glad this whole COVID craziness is over, because we've all become a little too reliable on relying on like what we're doing here with a Zoom type meeting or email or disconnected dialogue, in my opinion. And we got to get to much more customer facing. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is much more, what are we doing to drive our customers and prospects forward? And then Friday is typically sort of looking back and assessing where we're at and, continuing. And I usually have information on each of the people that report to me and the organization I have, and sort of, make sure on a weekly basis I'm coming back and touching those. Either I missed completely and didn't do anything that week and I got to make sure it's a priority next week, or what did I learn and what kinds of things am I tracking towards? Especially if I have a team, I want to make sure weekly I'm thinking about and looking at each of my team members' own development. And, this comes with having already spoken to them of where they want to go, what they're looking for, what's important to them, where they see their weaknesses are, how I can support them, making sure I'm moving that ball, moving the ball forward on their desires and their career development and their contribution to my organization on a weekly basis. And that typically happens on a Friday for rolling back in for the following week.
We share some similarities actually in terms of the way we structure or think about the working week, the way that it it looks to myself and my team is that Mondays are predominantly focused around forecasting and one-to-ones and pipeline generation. And then Tuesday to Thursday is all about customers. Customers is the priority, and then deal reviews kind of secondary to that because there's still a link to the customer. And then Friday is all about enablement, territory planning, and a bit of a look back. So we share some synergy there, and I absolutely see the value in that structure. You may have noticed, Jim, I have a picture behind me, which is of Muhammad Ali. I'm a massive combat sports fan. And some people liken our careers to athletes, right? And sports people, because they say you kind of got to get in, make your money and get out, because it takes so much out of you as an individual because of the pressures, the demands, the consistency of targets and beyond. And here you are 25 years deep, still a current day operator. What's the secret? How have you sustained over such an extended period of time?
I have no idea. No. I love the picture of Muhammad Ali. A short side story is I also am a great fan of his. I'm just a wonderful human being. Did a lot for everybody. Touched so many lives. I love Billy Crystal's eulogy, which I'm sure you've listened to and everyone's listened to time and again. And what a just incredible impact he had. And my favorite story with that is spent time in Munich, and while I was there all by myself trying to figure things out, I'd go to this restaurant bar on the ground floor of the flat I lived in, and I got to know Marco, the owner, and we used to chat about things. And one of my favorite things was when I left, I sent him my favorite poster of Muhammad Ali, which he sent me a picture of, and it's on his bar, right in the center of his bar. So it's a really great thing that tied us together. But I think it's it's two things. One is I actually enjoy what I do. I enjoy the challenge and the process. And I think I've learned not to let it get to me, right? So I think of the things that are the positives, like having engagement with customers, developing a relationship, earning their trust, and really working on, making their jobs, their careers, their companies move forward with what you can offer and what you can do. And frankly, if we can't do that in some way, or we can't see it leading to that in some way, it's hard to make a case for a big deal. And as you probably know, and everybody who's been in tech sales in particular, there's a lot of big deals that happen that no one gets any value whatsoever out of. And it's all because of the marketing or the hype, or, look at AI right now. And don't get me wrong, there's some great AI capabilities out there and great solutions, but there's also a lot of AI that was, sold, that people spent a lot of money on, that just never had any chance of being successful. And it was more because, hey, I want to say my company's committed to AI, and we invested $3 million in whatever. And I've done those kinds of deals, but for me, it's more about the excitement of going and say, hey, we can actually impact these companies and these organizations and how make their lives better, and then feel the pressure, understand the need, understand the end of quarter craziness, and communication management that you have to do up your chain to your senior leadership to help set expectations and, and do things, but not let it get to you. I mean, I remember early in my career, my wife waking me up out of my sleep because I'm sitting up in the bed having a conversation with, the CFO of Oracle on why we didn't close a deal that I was trying to close at the end of that quarter, like complete stress, stress overload. And I can compartmentalize that now, and I can leave that at the office and come home. But it doesn't mean I'm less worried about it. I'm going to spend less time on it. I've just learned how to manage and cope with that as well. I think the burnout happens when you let that stay in you and fester in you, and that can have a real detrimental effect on your health and your aging and everything else, over time if you let it. So
I noticed in that, Jim, you said you've learned how to handle that now, and several times you used the word I've learned to, which really indicates the fact that it's probably taken some time for you to get to a point where you're as efficient with managing this, managing your energy and this ability to shift your perspective. So if you're talking now out there to that first time sales leader who's just gotten their promotion, they're looking at the year ahead, they're excited, but daunted, right, by the reality that they've got a big target, a new team. What tactical advice would you give to that sales leader to try and help them fast track where you are already mentally?
Yeah, I think, especially if it's someone new, if they're being promoted in my organization, I'm going to make sure they know they're going to be given a little bit of leeway and a little bit of, understanding, like, you're commit to a number in a quarter or, performance things. We're going to give you a little bit of leeway, and I'm going to make sure they know that and say, take advantage of that. And, the best thing you can do is be honest with, get your team, and those resources you have selling, get them to be honest with you. There's no time, and this is another, I probably have 7 or 8 mantras, right? But another one of them is get to the truth, right? And don't sugarcoat. And I've seen most sales organizations flail and struggle mightily because the salesperson, the hunter out in the field is painting a rosy picture to their manager, and their manager is now adding their rosy picture to it. And by the time it gets somewhere else, it's nothing like the deal that's actually, going on there in the field. It's completely fabricated, right? So number one is make sure you have a really good, honest, and critical understanding of what you really have in front of you, right? And then from that, if you have a good meeting, it doesn't mean the deal closed. You had a good meeting, and the worst is, hey, I had a great meeting. I said, great, what's the next step? Oh, I didn't ask. We had a shitty meeting. So you had a bad meeting. But get people to be on, get your people, now that you're managing, get their trust and get them, you want bad news early, you want honest information, and when there is a deal that's going, you want to be able to communicate that up so that people get genuinely excited about the deals that are real, and now you have the ability to get, the resources of the company around those ones that really matter. If you don't have that, that's one of the fundamental things, to be accurately understand what's really going on in your team and the patch, right? To be able to, and then be able to effectively communicate that to leadership.
Makes complete sense. We've gotten onto the topic of deals, so let's spend a bit of time talking about the premise of winning business, closing deals. Talk to us, Jim, about some of the core principles that you have in your mind when it comes to winning business, whether it's a certain way of thinking, a methodology, or anything in between.
Yeah, I'm a big believer. I've studied and have taken, I think, attribute pieces from lots of different sales methodologies. And I'm a big believer in, tracking everything. First thing I do usually when I walk in an organization is I say, oh, what do you use for a CRM? What's HubSpot? I say, okay, here's our new saying. If it's not in HubSpot, it didn't happen. So if you're not tracking the information and it's not in there, I can't even talk to you about it because it's not real, right? We have to. And, and that doesn't mean I want people spending a whole day every week updating HubSpot. I want them to integrate, their CRM into the daily activities they do. And today it's so easy with Salesforce and, I mentioned HubSpot already and others, you can have it on your phone. If you make a phone call, do it from the CRM system, then it pops up a little note and now it logs the activity, like all these things. So now you can, effectively see the statistical information that you can then relate to a sales process, right? And now compare one rep to another rep and territories, and you have some reliable, tangible data to make these, to get these understanding. So that's kind of number one. And then number two is, I've done the Sandler sales, the spin selling. I'm a big fan of the challenger sale, just because of the attitude you want to have. You want to basically challenge the customer, and again, it's loving that customer's problem and challenging them on how, articulating and quantifying what these problems are, because if they do that and you can get them to do that, one, it's great for them, and two, it's really great for going forward, with communication with the customer, right? So you're earning their trust and moving things forward. So those are some fundamentals, and then beyond that, once you go, once you go beyond that, you now want to start thinking about what do I need to do to make sure I validated what I'm hearing from, one person or another person in the organization. So how big of a connection do I have into this company? How do I get other people involved? How do I get people in my company involved and constituents so I can now validate things? Because another, sort of truism in sales, which I'm sure you would agree with, is prospects often lie. They don't mean to, but they don't want to, nobody wants to say no, right? And what ends up happening is so you've got to be able to have, again, get a dialogue going and a trust going with the customer. So they give you real information, right? And as soon as they're giving you more truthful information, you now can take that, and assess it. And oftentimes it's a no, right? If it's not feasible, it's much, much better. Yes is the best answer. A fast no is the second best answer. And anything that's a slow no is a waste of everybody's time. And so you've got to be able to, assess those and offer opportunities to the customers to either say yes and enthusiastically to the point where they're giving you all the information to help you navigate and articulate how you can solve their problem, or it's a no and you move on, right? Those are some of the core components.
Through all of that learning, Jim, I'd love to know if there's a deal that sticks out in your mind or your memory. Really a key takeaway, a big learning that you had from that deal, which you feel that the audience could potentially take away and learn from as well.
Where do I start? It's funny. Most of the ones that come to mind when you say something like that are ones where losses. Where ones where we came in. But I'll tell you about one that I thought was, again, after learning and losing a few times, I had this one opportunity. It was an existing customer, and they had an inventory management system, and I was, they were my customer. They were using ours, right? And they brought in a new senior leader of the warehousing and fulfillment. And, I looked at this person's background, did some homework, and realized that this person had just installed my competitor, his previous company, and had now come to this company. So my suspicion, and, after asking a few people, because I had a lot of good contacts there, they were saying that, he's making a case internally that, this current solution isn't going to work, and he's going to want to, bring in and do a bake-off and review and see and potentially replace us. And so it was clear from the outset that he wanted, the other solution. And sometimes, you get to a point where you just know no matter what you do, and this is the fun part about selling, right, is the story you have and the solution you offer can get you in the door and create interest. But the deal happens with people, and it's where they are, what's it mean to them in their career, who they're coming from, who do they already have relationships with, and and you kind of assess all that relative to your positioning and competitive positioning, and you usually get a pretty good picture. And it's not usually about, hey, they do this thing better and you don't, right? It's more about, like, this gentleman had our competitor in his pocket, and he loved working with them, loved the rep, they'd been good friends, they would tell me about the golf outings they do, these kinds of things. So what I said was, there's only one way to kind of change this, and what we've got to do is we've got to, get a fair comparison, and I need to make sure he's not the decision maker. So what I did was I actually had a good meeting with him, went to lunch, but then came back and wrote up a summary, and I sent it internally to my leadership about, and basically was very frank about, this isn't going to work. He's in, we might as well just not even we're not going to get a fair comparison. And I accidentally CC'd him and the CFO of that company on that email.
Wow.
And it went, right? But,
wow.
It's like, hey, if I don't, I could, and then it created a fair amount of anger, but it also then opened up a real dialogue, and it got a CFO involved now saying, hey, no, here's, and then now he's got a new appreciation for what we've been doing for the company and the other pieces. And so at least now we got to a point where I felt like we were on a much, level playing field, and he wouldn't, he's not the only decision maker anymore, because otherwise we would have lost.
Wow.
So
that's I love that story, Jim. Honestly, it's a great story. Thank you very much for sharing that. I've got a couple more questions for you. One is just, as you look back and reflect over the past 25 years with the foresight and the wisdom that you have now, if you could go back, would you have done anything differently?
Yeah, I mean, there's always, there's certainly lots of deals and maybe a few startup companies that didn't pan out the way I'd wanted them. One startup I worked for, that company, EBT, that had that browser way back when. I wish I'd stayed with them longer because it just was a good ride. I got an opportunity and was recruited somewhere else and took it, had big eyes around. It was actually Oracle. So, I did, ended up doing well at Oracle. So I guess that's not, I think that for me, and it's more personal, I wish I'd done more international work sooner. I'd always had a desire and an interest in doing things, and really myself, getting immersed in different cultures and different societies and different, ways of life and different business models outside of the U.S. And I did some of that. I did some early in my career. When I was a software engineer. And then I did some, obviously I had a great opportunity with Amazon when we started a business here in the U.S. It was very successful after 2 years. And my boss, who was running the division at the time, came to me and said, okay, let's sit down. We're going to do our planning for next year. What do you want to do? And I said, well, are we rolling this out in Europe next year? And she was actually very supportive and, offered and introduced me and offered to support me. And, I had this opportunity to go live in Europe for 2.5 years, and it was just eye-opening. I think, not to go too far into the state of the United States, where it is now in politics and everything else, I just really wish I had done it sooner. And it's amazing the perspective you get, and a worldview you get that you don't have if you don't go live somewhere else. You don't go, immerse yourself in other cultures. And it brings me back here, I think, with a better perspective. And I feel like I'm a better seller, I'm a better manager now because of that.
It's a great call out. Great call out. I've got one final question for you, Jim, which is, what is the single best piece of advice that you'd give to any sales leader that's listening right now to help them to up level in their career?
That's a good question. I've got 6 or 7 of them that I'm mulling around in my head. I would say, don't be afraid of the risk. And I think, especially in the sense of, picking how do I endear myself to my leadership, versus what's the real deal, right? I think we all get to a point in our career where we have enough experience. We know you can look and say, I know what needs to happen here, right? And yet, you're tentative, or you're unable because of whether it's going to disrupt someone else's job, or it's going to maybe change the strategy or put something at risk or whatever. Don't be afraid to put it out there. And again, a lot of that came back from my experience at Amazon, which is, one of their biggest mantra, one of these 14 leadership principles is disagree and commit, right? If you disagree and you're in the shipping dock, you can be in the room with the CEO and disagree on something. And if you've got the data and the logic and the understanding to support it, and people look at it pragmatically, you have an opportunity to make a good positive change. Don't shy away from it in place of placating someone else, or, just following the strategy without really objecting to it if you really feel strongly about something.
It's a great way to finish, Jim. Have you enjoyed being on Target?
I have thoroughly enjoyed it. Yes, it's been great.
Wonderful. Well, really appreciate you sharing your wisdom with the audience. To anyone that's been out there listening or watching on YouTube, please take a moment to share with a colleague, like, comment, share, and subscribe. And we look forward to seeing you on the next one.